How you doing, man?
I'm good. How are you guys? Nice to see you. Look how
Good,
long your
good.
hair got. Last time I saw you, you looked
Yeah.
like a fighter pilot.
Yeah,
Now
this
you look like a now you look like a I don't know, a roadie.
yeah, this is
No.
partly due to the quarantining and all that, and I just
Mhm.
figured just roll with it, just let it go anyway. Whatever.
Yeah.
I like your
Cool.
place, man. Very
Oh,
nice.
thank you.
Nice decor, color. You got it down.
Thank you
Wow,
very much. Yeah.
cool.
It's a nice
So how
spot.
you
I
been,
like
man?
it. Great.
Yeah?
I've been excellent. Been super busy.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, been really, really busy. But
Mm,
other than that, I've been really, really good. Just occupying my time and
yeah.
staying current with hobbies and stuff like that. So I don't
Oh.
know, pretty mentally and physically healthy. How about yourself?
Same, physically, mentally healthy. Just kind of having a good time out here. It doesn't really seem like there's a pandemic going on here, but what's it like in New York?
It's fine.
Yeah,
It's everyone wears masks. It's really kind of opening up right now.
sure.
But you can eat inside restaurants now, but it's just less people that are in the restaurants. There's outdoor seating everywhere in Manhattan.
Oh,
Um, but everyone kind of like works from home too, so
yeah,
that's kind of a bit of a change. God, I'm rarely. I used to be on the subway every day.
right.
Now it's just like, oh my god, I'm going on the
Wow.
subway today? It's amazing. Yeah, so
So is it
it's
is it practically fully remote, or is it sort of
I
blended?
work 100% remote.
Oh,
Yeah. But the thing was when I was working in the office, it was like I was going to an office
yeah.
to work remotely.
Right. Okay. I
Because
understand what you mean.
there was one time like our whole team was on a Zoom meeting and
Uh-huh.
like someone kind of like popped their head up in the office and was just like, is everybody in this room? And everyone was like, yeah. They're like, let's just go in the conference room then. Like, this is ridiculous. But that's how um, used to working this way.
Yeah.
We've been this whole time. So this has kind of been a smooth transition. It's just that I liked, getting up in the morning, getting ready, going, commuting down to my office, getting coffee,
Oh, you
and
actually
getting into
like
that
that. Ah,
mindset. But now I'm just kind of used to waking up, shuffling around the apartment,
yeah. That's
getting my
interesting. So
stuff
you
done.
you
And
feel like it's sort of affected your I guess sense of scheduling?
no,
No.
no, not at all. Because I mean, I use, I'm at the mercy of my calendar.
Yeah.
So the sense of scheduling, not really. It's just the environment in which I work is now
Mm,
the environment in which I spend my leisure time.
I
And it's
see.
hard to mentally separate those. So when I first got kind of in the groove of things, I would dress up for work, go to
Mm,
work in my house at my desk here, and then when work was over, I'd go change my clothes
yeah.
just so I could get out of the mindset. Or usually what my routine is now is that once work is done at 5 o'clock, I go for a
Uh-huh.
run.
Yeah.
I just do that every day, and it just
Uh,
resets me. And so when I come back in, it's no longer my workspace; it's my private space.
it seems like you've acclimated pretty well to the whole remote working. So
Yeah,
I
it's
figured
fun.
this line of work transitions or translates pretty well to that sort of lifestyle, work style.
Mm-hmm.
It's
It
interesting.
really does because well, in higher ed, yes and no, especially in our team, yes.
Hmm.
But in like kind of the freelance corporate world, you're also
Yeah.
kind of moving around a lot. You have like all these
Uh,
different projects. Are you
yeah.
going to a place? Are you meeting remotely? Like, where is the project? How long is the project? All those things.
Okay.
So,
So you mentioned both. Oh, go
yeah,
ahead.
go.
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. I was
Oh,
just gonna say like,
yeah.
how is it being back in the States? How long have you been back? A year now?
Um, this is like 7 months. We had so many plans that just, went out the window with the turn of the pandemic. I mean,
Mhm.
right as I left Cheongdam, the company that you and I previously worked at, uh, just the plans shifted so drastically, so quickly, and we were sort of, in a sense, forced to come to the States. My wife and I, previously we had planned to go to Japan and Malaysia and all that stuff. But it's been a good shift. I mean, once I stepped, on, the soil here, it was kind of like this is a new chapter, a breath of fresh air.
Mhm.
And everything, I thankfully we were prepared. I had enough savings stored. My family was very helpful and just comfortably. worked out. So I can't, complain at all. I'm actually very thankful it turned out this way. It could have, I just imagine the scenario could have been so dark. But yeah, I really like Texas, man. I'm glad to be back. Perhaps I'm glad, it turned out the way it did. But it's still a lot of work to do. A lot of sort of base building and networking, branching out. So,
Yeah, have you had many projects since you came back?
oh yeah, I would say it was basically building up my portfolio website, basically getting my hands busy with different self projects. I've tried to do a little bit of freelancing. Actually, I'm still in have my feet in that world, but yeah, I've been doing pretty good keeping busy in the instructional design um, sort of field, I guess. Uh, but yeah, it's again glad to be back in Texas. Texas is awesome. So
Yeah, it is. I
I
like
was
it there.
actually planning to stop by New York. My wife, she spent a bit of time there. She knows a lot of people, but unfortunately, we couldn't make that trip. So maybe in a not too distant future, we'll swing by and say what's up.
I would love that. I would love to see it. Yeah,
Cool.
it'd be very fun to see outside of the context I'm usually used to seeing you in. So,
So I just want to sort of uh, give a little backdrop to our story. We met in South Korea, working at the same academy, a company called Cheongdam. And for me to sum up your personality, uh, there was one particular event that stood out, and that's where you split your pants, right? You split your jeans or your work pants, and
I'm
of
trying
course, we're
trying to do a
curious.
handstand.
Yeah, and to me, that summed up your personality at an instant. I was like, wow.
Great.
And another thing that stood out about you was when I mentioned instructional design to you, like immediately you ran off with the idea and just like was very enthusiastic about it. Obviously, flourished, very busy. You had your own projects from the get-go. I mean, you got the master's degree program going. So I would say that you are a rare example of someone who commits to in the instructional design field, but also a good example of how this particular field really shines with a lot of people and has a lot of opportunities, and it's very exciting. It's a very exciting field. Um, so that's a little bit of background of how I know you as far as how you got into instructional design. Can you elaborate from your perspective, how did you get started in this field?
Well, first of all, thanks. That was very flattering what you just said, and I really appreciate it. How do I get started in this field? I'm gonna just kind of like tell a short little story that leads up to you kind of suggesting this to me. So,
All
like,
right.
I've been working in education since, or just the educational field, since 2010. So I started as an ESL instructor at Chungdam at the tail end of the recession.
Mm,
So I was living in Portland. I was a writer for a magazine, and I got laid off in '09. So I had to go back to bartending just to kind of make ends meet. And soon after, I took a job as a truck driver,
mm,
which lasted about 10 months. And during that time, I was like, I really need to change. This is miserable. I hate
mm,
this. This is horrible. Uh, Another thing against truck drivers, but I mean, it wasn't for me. And then a buddy of mine, as a joke, suggested that I teach English in Asia for a year.
mm,
And I thought, that's actually not a bad idea, man.
mm,
So I did that. And that opened up a lot of things for me. And I really learned how to teach. I worked off and on a couple of years here, 6 months travel break here, a
mm.
year here, a year there, in different schools, but mainly in the Cheongdam umbrella. And I did that from 2010 to 2017. So the
Mm,
last year I was there, you and I worked at the same school,
right.
and you were very generously listening to me gripe about our new 3.0 methodology one day in the library, and suggested maybe you should get into instructional design, um, because you were currently doing a distance program through Texas A&M. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, well, Thomas really knows what he's talking about, and this really aligns with like kind of what my interests are. So I looked into it, and I was like immediately hooked.
Yeah, you were.
because it was filled with like all the stuff that I was already interested in. I
Yeah.
just didn't know that that was an actual job, like most people don't, right? So like you, I'm sure when you tell people what you do, they're like, "What is that?" And you have to explain it to them, and they're still just like, "I don't get it. Can you explain it?" That's a job, and that's even like to your parents. You gotta like explain it over and over again. So I'm sure you come up with just some, like I do, just some kind of like short saying that I'm a consultant, something like that. And so
Right.
I don't have to like explain it. So I was moving to New York at the end of the year anyway, and I decided that getting a master's degree would be a smart move because the loans would float me while I worked
Mhm.
part time, and the field appeared to have a ton of job growth because, like you said,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
super exciting. And I looked at this stuff and I was like, oh wow, yeah, this profession gets tons of work all over the place, and it's stretch, and this like part of L&D, learning and development, stretches to like all sorts of organizations. It's not just one field. It's not just education, right? It's the medical field. It's the boring compliance training of every organization ever, right? They always have openings, and there's always
Mhm.
job growth. So I applied to a program while I was still in Asia at a Manhattan College in New York.
Mhm.
And the day after I got off the plane in NYC, I went to my first class.
Mhm.
And I graduated in a little under 2 years. And
Mhm.
while I was there, I built a ton of like crazy cool relationships with people in the field,
Mhm.
professors and people in my cohort. And I found a mentor while I was there, which was like an essential piece of me, uh, kind of continuing on with this and really getting my hooks in.
Yeah.
And I got a paid internship building a MOOC at Columbia University
Mhm.
for their General Studies Center for Veterans Transition and Integration,
Mhm.
CVTI. So it was like we built this a MOOC, a massive open online course through the
Mhm.
edX platform to help veterans take their skills that they learned in uh, the armed forces and
Mhm.
bring those skills into kind of a softer setting in the private and public sector. So after a year of doing that, I applied for a full-time job with Columbia's online curriculum and instruction team as an ID, as an instructional designer. And after 6 months of interviews, 6 months of interviewing with them, I got it. And that's where I am now.
See, that's where the
Um,
handstand that's where the handstand plays in. I mean, I'm telling you, like very active and experimental, very busy. That's awesome.
yeah, the program was great. Like I made a bunch of connections there,
Yeah.
and because of those connections, I get freelance projects now. And I teach a public speaking class at Manhattan College in the
Oh, right
winters.
on.
So I get to adjunct there as well and add that to portfolio. So things couldn't have possibly worked out any better. So
Mm.
a humongous and resounding thank you, Thomas, for suggesting it. Because if
Well, right
you would
back
have
at
never
you,
said
man.
anything,
Yeah.
I would, I don't know what I'd be doing. So much,
I mean,
all my gratitude.
thank you as well for, taking it as far, taking this idea and, flourishing it as much as you have. That's quite an undertaking, quite a exciting journey you've found yourself in. So thank you for doing something amazing with it. Um, so you mentioned, you started right after you got off the plane. So I imagine there was a lot of like face-to-face, sort of like in-class work. Was there any sort of distance, like even before the corona outbreak, was there any sort of distance work that you did while you were
There
there?
was a bunch because a lot of this has to do with distance and blended learning or synchronous asynchronous learning, like our field. And one of the like kind of the tenets of like proper pedagogy is that the context of practice has to mirror the context of use. So the way in which you practice things should be in the environment in which it is done.
Right.
So you wouldn't, for example, you wouldn't learn to swim in a field, right?
Right.
Like, yeah. So there was a lot of, it was blended. It was part online, part synchronous, part asynchronous, part face to face. But the face to face part was heavily influenced by technology, using smart boards and doing collaborations. There was a lot of agile work. It's almost as
Right.
if they run the class sessions in the program like agile, but it was very professional focused. Um, uh, with a very strong undergirding of learning theory and pedagogy. So we dove very deep into cognitive sciences and how that can apply. So anything that was research backed and evidence informed, we were learning how to use in real life, not just in the context of academia. It's like, how do we make money
Mm.
using these skills, and how do we make these experiences more meaningful and effective?
Yeah, it seems like in the world of instructional design, instruction is built upon the premise of like almost like performance-based education. So it's very interesting to see that your academic experience kind of mirrors that. It makes perfect sense. It does. Um, so when you, how long were you in New York until everything turned upside down with Corona? How long was that? A few months?
Oh man, a couple of years.
Couple years? Ah, wow.
Yeah, so
Okay.
from from March
Right.
2017 to when it hit in 2020
Wow.
in
And
January. So yeah, I was here for quite a
yeah,
while. So I've almost been here for 3 years now.
wow. I
Yeah.
imagine that in this line of work, the tools, like a lot of the software authoring tools and things like, I mean, it's just made for distance work. But how did that affect, I guess, the curriculum design, the instructional design in terms of the student learning experience, like how that dramatic shift.
For COVID?
Yeah.
Okay. So, all right. So I was at Columbia officially for a little over a year
Hmm.
before COVID happened. I was in New
Hmm.
York longer than that, and I was working uh, at Columbia as a contractor, but not in the kind of Columbia political system, as it were, right? Like I didn't have to deal with like administrators or directors or anything that, needed to oversee things. I worked with a small unit that were like servicing veterans.
Hmm.
Um, so I was there for a little over a year in my current role, but there was no contingency plan for a pandemic.
Yeah.
So being unprepared for a crisis generally happens because like the arrogance or hubris of management and its lack of preventative measures in the name of the budget,
I.
right? So at all levels in all industries, it was a bit of a shit show.
Mm,
Everyone was just like scattered, I guess. And in the higher ed world, it just wasn't about the modality shift in teaching and learning from face to face to online. It was about logistics and
yeah.
enrollment
I see.
and maintaining enrollment.
Right.
Administrators and directors like jockeying for political position, like who's going to be in charge. People resigning. People
Yeah.
were like stepping it up. People were like doing things in ceremony, but like weren't
Mm,
actually like contributing value.
right.
So what really happened was like all these mass trainings had happened with
Mm,
not enough resources in order to reach the outcomes we wanted. So when it came to the training, we needed to think teachers first. Usually it's like task centered or problem centered, then student facing, and then the
mm,
teacher, right? That's good pedagogy. But when training for this kind of exigent, I guess,
mm,
we had these mass trainings. So a lot fell on our unit, which isn't a huge unit. I mean, we service a lot of the programs. But basically, in a month's time, we had to train all of our faculty to adjust the way they've taught for decades to fit into a class model they've never seen
right.
by a way of technology they've never used. So that wasn't exactly like feasible, right?
Yeah.
It was like the ship went down and nobody knew how to swim. So the best you can come up with at that point is like a life raft and some
Oh,
survival tips and
wow.
good luck. But the
Yeah.
quality of the instruction for the students is going to suffer. It just was.
Mm,
And
mm,
it did for a while. It's getting much better now because
mm,
they're adjusting. So online and blended learning, synchronous, asynchronous, whatever, requires so much more planning than face-to-face teaching.
I
So
see.
not just more planning, not just more planning, but different planning.
I
So
see.
when done right with the right resources and the right amount of support,
Mm.
all the research shows that like online blended courses are actually more effective than face-to-face
Oh
classrooms.
yeah. Oh yeah.
So yeah, and I'm sure you've dug into that research yourself, and maybe that's a little bit of both of our bias because this is the world we work in. But it gets a bad rap because teachers try to copy and paste their face-to-face courses into the LMS, thinking,
Mm,
oh, it should just work fine,
mm,
right? And it doesn't work that way. It's imperative to apply, specific and intended pedagogical techniques to the digital landscape. So because it's limited, it's not as free as the classroom is. So you don't get to rely on your personality as much in order to like increase engagement and thus, get learners to do what you need them to do. So what we ended up doing was like facilitating these massive trainings in like the essential functions of tools. So Canvas, Zoom, etc. And providing like a ton of support at odd hours. So like I would, after, 8 o'clock at night, there would be like, some course going on and I'd have to kind of like pop in and, like kind of white hat Zoom bomb the course and be like, is everything all right? Is everything functioning? Are you having trouble finding a feature? All right, the annotation button's here. Do this, there you go. All right, have a nice day. Let me know if you need anything, right? So it was a lot of hand holding. And that was kind of like number one, get them familiar with the equipment. Then we started like providing pedagogical consultations that they kind of signed up for and started suggesting ed tech to close some of the gaps that we were starting to see, right? So there were some like in-class discussions that work really well in class, but they don't work really well online. So like what ed tech do we leverage in order to not lose that authenticity, right? And then how do we train really quickly a teacher who might not be very digitally savvy in that tool in order to monitor it and facilitate? So I was tasked to create a course on Canvas in our system, which is like a faculty-facing course for how to pivot instruction from face-to-face to online, which is like a parachute resource for them. And then for fall, we rolled out a high flex model that allowed students to attend in person, online, or asynchronously, which is going okay. Are you familiar with the high flex model? It's been in like all the ed news stuff lately. Yeah. Okay. So like I would have recommended staying synchronously online. I don't think the high flex model with PPE and social distancing works because of those imperatives. But they needed increased enrollment and people weren't willing to pay Columbia prices if they could be on Columbia campus, at least some of the time. So, it's a trade-off.
That's where some of the logistic problems run in. I can just imagine like the powder keg. At some point, there's some grasp that face-to-face instructors have in terms of some educational technology, like LMSs, for example. I imagine there's some complexities there that you have to hash out, but were there any other tools? You mentioned Zoom. Were there any other specific tools that most, if not all, of the instructors, I guess, at Columbia University had to be acclimated to, like LMS, Zoom? Was there anything else?
Um, no, we tried to keep it as simple as possible
Okay.
because technology should never drive pedagogy. Pedagogy should inform tech decisions. And if you're just throwing tech at a problem thinking it's
Right.
going to solve it, if you do solve it, you're going to cause 4 more different problems.
Mm.
So, you're patching up one hole while, 4 other form, right? So we kept it very, very trim. Uh, and they're getting better at it. They're getting much better at it, actually, and they're starting to get used to it and seeing the value.
Mhm.
And our kind of main focus for that was like demonstrate ease of use for them,
Yeah.
because a perceived ease of use leads to a perceived usefulness and
Mhm.
then a behavioral intent to use, right? So they're going to
Gotcha.
be more likely to use it if they think it's valuable. They're only going to think it's valuable if they think they can use it.
Mm.
So that was what we did in the trainings. It's very bare bones essential, and this is how you do this thing. And it was very mathematical.
Mm.
The LMS stuff, we work exclusively in Canvas.
Right.
But what's cool about Canvas is not just in LMS. It's
Mhm.
kind of like when people think in LMS, they think of a filing cabinet for work
Right.
and a Dropbox for assignments. And
Uh-huh.
Canvas is pretty much an authoring tool. It's
Okay.
not just it just doesn't animate stuff like an authoring tool does,
Right.
right? It's like it's its own thing, but it's amazing. It also has like a built-in accessibility checker, and
Mhm.
it takes SCORM packages and has a
Right.
billion learning technology integrations, right? So you can
Mhm.
take any ed tech tool, embed it into Canvas, and it'll talk to the grade book, which is fantastic, right? So everything kind of gets interlocked. So I've designed courses in Moodle and edX and Blackboard, and those are great, but Canvas is just like the superior system. And if you know it well, you can do anything with it.
Wow. I've got my hands dirty with mostly Moodle, and I had the same thought that Moodle to me was not just a storage platform; it was an authoring tool, as you said. Are you familiar with was it the H5P? Um,
H5P, man.
yeah.
There, you have to pay for it now.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
So to me, that was like, all the things that authoring tools provide, like I'm partial to Storyline. I like Captivate as well. And I would say so far what I've seen with, H5P, it covers a lot of that ground that those authoring tools, albeit those authoring tools are a lot more, sophisticated, a lot more interactive, I should
Mm-hmm.
say. But yeah, it's interesting that learning management systems have evolved to sort of be inclusive of all those aspects, interactivity. So you say Canvas is the your go-to, but how much experience do you have with Moodle? What did you like about it? Where do you think Canvas succeeds in that term?
You can just, I feel like you can do more with Canvas. It's better organized. The
Hmm.
layout's nicer. It's also open source. So if you know HTML, you can
Hmm.
fidget with this stuff.
Hmm.
I like Moodle a lot. I made a lot of courses in Moodle. And in my program, our LMS was Moodle. So I learned all my stuff on Moodle as well, and then
Hmm.
didn't get involved with Canvas until I got to Columbia. And then when I got on Canvas, and there's a little bit of like retro or proactive interference when I'm like
Hmm.
learning Canvas. So like all the old stuff I learned from Moodle was interfering with the new stuff I want to learn in Canvas. So at first I was like, oh, this sucks. And then I was like, oh, it can do that. Oh, it can do this. Oh, this is
Hmm.
there. Oh my God, this is so much better.
Hmm.
So I was, yeah, that's what it kind of was. I like Moodle a lot because it's open source and you can do a lot of stuff with it. But I like Canvas's use of modules, all of the interactivities that they have in it. Um, there's a general way that it's set up and how integrated everything is. It just makes things a whole lot easier. And once you kind of know kind of the underlying kind of framework to it, you're like, okay, I don't need this ed tech tool to
Yeah.
do video discussions. I can do that in Canvas.
Mhm.
That's fine, right? That it's much in, it kind of becomes its own authoring tool. So like when I first started doing this, it was like, okay, what kind of ed tech tools can I throw into this program and make it look all jazzy? And
Yeah.
now I'm just like, what don't I have to use
Yeah.
that I can just do in in this thing, and I don't have to train faculty on tools that they might only
Right.
use for 1 week,
Right.
you
It's
know?
very important. It's
Mm-hmm.
very important. Yeah, just to simplify the numbers, bring it down. Was there any crossover of other authoring tools like into Canvas courses that you helped design? Like, did you ever find yourself using like Captivate
Mm-hmm.
and send it through a SCORM package or anything
Mm-hmm.
like that?
Yeah, I've done that a couple of times.
A couple
It
times,
wasn't
yeah.
it wasn't captive, it's Storyline. So the
Okay.
freelance work that I do is usually in Storyline.
Mm. You guys
Um,
use 360 or just the storyline?
360.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
Articulate the 360.
Mm.
They were looking into Rise at one point, but
Hmm.
it's there's no version control on that, and
I
it can
see.
be yeah, it looks nice. It's good
Mm.
for quick little trainings. Makes your trainings look nice, but I don't think it's good. It's good for like online trainings, but not really good for like
Yeah.
long term learning.
I
So
see.
it's more like performance support than it is actual like learning.
So there
Um,
there was some crossover, but for the most part, it's basically using the Canvas as an authoring tool. Is that correct?
And then
Yeah,
some ed tech stuff, like
I see.
some faculty have ed tech programs that they like Flipgrid or something, or
Mm.
what is another one, like a Padlet. They love Padlet
Mm.
for doing agile sprints, and like savvy starts and stuff.
Right.
Yeah, they like doing that
You
stuff.
guys
So the
use what?
collaboration tools, I
Yeah.
use a ton of Google Suite
Uh,
just because everyone has it. It's collaborative, it's shared, and you can do a lot of stuff in it.
so you threw in the Savvy Start terminology. Does that mean you guys use the SAM model a lot there? Like what's your organization's go-to?
Um, in terms of the models,
Yeah.
well, the organization really
Mm.
doesn't have a
set
have a
model.
have a set model. We have a project timeline. So the way that
Mm,
let me see here. So there's all sorts of models. They're like the main ones that like jobs usually put in their job descriptions
mm,
are like Addie,
right.
Sam, and the Dick and Carey model.
Yeah.
And the thing is like it's funny that like jobs are asking you to be set, to know all three of those,
Hmm.
and they don't even like use them. They just
Is
kind of
that right?
Googled what do you need to know to be an instructional designer, and
That's
then they just kind
interesting.
of dump that into
Yeah.
their job description.
Yeah.
So, so like the and all those models serve a purpose.
Hmm.
I don't really have like a favorite one or anything or one that we
Mm,
use. I kind of mix them up,
okay.
and it ends up looking like the design thinking model. So
Mhm.
that's like empathize, define, ideate, prototype, test, iterate. But I guess for the sake of our conversation, so people at home can know what the hell I'm talking about. I'll break
Same.
down kind of what I think about those models, right?
Hmm.
So Addie, Dick and Carey, and Sam. So Addie's
Hmm.
kind of like the big one everyone knows because it's super easy to remember, and some big capital letters: analyze, design, develop, implement, and evaluate. So it kind of paints the parts of the design cycle with a very broad brush. And it's really more of like a budgeting tool. So
Hmm.
freelancers can justify the ID process to their clients. So for example, they say like the analysis phase, we're going to take this long and we're going to do these things and these action items, cover this ground. And because of its importance to the whole project, it's worth this much of the budget. And that's the really rigid way to actually design a project. So it ends up being like a classic example of the map not being the terrain.
Mm,
And I tend not to use it in higher ed. I'd be surprised if anyone uses ADDIE beyond breaking down like the pieces of a project after the fact.
wow.
So the Dick and Carey model is a bit more realistic
Hmm.
because the whole thing is kind of based on backwards mapping and ensuring
Mm,
alignment,
mm,
meaning that you start with your objectives, then you do your assessments, and then you do your activities, and then you do your resources, and then you go back and you see how all those you adjust all those things for performance. So there's an iterative element to it. It's
oh yeah.
still a waterfall, but it's less of a waterfall than Addie. And I
Mm,
like it because it fits well with like the general higher ed instructional design
mm,
process. But it still needs to be a bit more flexible. So this type of model like tends to produce very precise learning experiences
mhm,
and is really, really good for like designing asynchronous training
mm,
because you have these performance objectives or learning objectives that are very clear, measurable, specific, and you need to make sure they can do those. So you use the Dick and Carey model to make sure you're drawing a direct line
mm,
between the resources, activities, and assessments to the objective. And that can be an issue with a nuanced group of learners, especially in higher ed. It's like the difference between like the band's Rush and Fish, right? One's all theory and no soul. The other's all soul and no theory.
is that right?
So yeah, and when what you wanted was Radiohead,
Mhm.
right?
Oh
Maybe
wow.
maybe that's a bad example, but
No, that's a perfect example. That's I'm impressed. Wow.
so like
Cool.
I feel like it's really good for skills training, but maybe not the best for knowledge and attitudes, right? It's really aligned with some really good learning theory though, like especially cognitive information processing stuff, like the cognitivist view and the instructionalist theories, like Gagnier's conditions and events.
Thanks. Yeah.
And those are really effective if you want to teach people how to do things. So Dick and Carey has a lot going for it in terms of like effective training. It just might not be the best route for creating a meaningful learning experience, right?
Mm,
And that brings us to Sam.
mm,
So I think Sam is the successive approximation model.
correct.
Sam,
Yes, sir.
right? Okay.
Uh,
Which is just like, I forget the guy who invented
it's
Sam.
Michael Allen.
That's it. Yeah, from Alan Comms,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, he runs Alan Comms, which is a big like corporate style
Yeah.
freelance firm. Uh, and it's just his kind of rebranding of agile to sound more academic
Yeah.
and cognitive science based, right? The successive approximation model. It's agile, is basically what it is. So I really like the model because it reflects the reality of how design projects are usually flow,
Mhm,
and then gives it some guidance and structure, but not too much, right? So
mm,
it takes these three general phases: prep, design, and development, and has you kind of like rapid prototype in sprints.
Yeah.
So you can kind of make these consistent adjustments based on some immediate feedback from your stakeholders.
A
So it's
lot
a
of
really good.
iteration
Mhm.
involved. That's kind of why what I like about it. I think that's where some of these other, I guess, agile models sort of adopted that, the rapid prototyping, a
Mhm.
lot of iterations, and it's kind of fluid in that sense. You can always come back, review,
Mhm.
make the next prototype, alpha, beta, gold, and
Yeah,
yeah, it's pretty
I like the
concise.
I like those things. Yeah, it's a great model. It's not a cure all though.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
really good, and I think this is why Alan Combs uses it, and not
Mm-hmm.
just because he created it, but like why they like this model is because it's really good for short deadlines and small
Mm-hmm.
projects. So using SAM for like a 14-week course on a 16-week design cycle might not be your best bet because stakeholder schedules, for one, and like kind of the multifaceted nature of a semester-long learning experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of find it best to synthesize these models to kind of fit the characteristics of whatever project I'm working on, right? So like it ends up looking like design thinking. So you get like the budgeting quality of Addy, you get the
Mm-hmm.
pedagogical properties and the alignment of Dick and Carey, and you get the
Yeah.
flexibility, prototyping, and feedback of Sam. But as most, like I guess, answers related to instructional design or answers to ID related questions,
Mm-hmm.
it all depends. Like
Mm-hmm.
there is no one answer for ID. That's the weirdest thing about it. Like you constantly have to be adjusting
Yeah.
uh, to the project, and a lot of stuff is like kind of based on your needs analysis, based on the personality of your
Mm-hmm.
SME or
Mm-hmm.
faculty member you're working with. So like I always try not to get stuck in one model, but I love using all those models to inform how I'm going to approach a project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you're right. There is no, and it, changes with the territory, changes with the needs analysis. But I feel like there is a general sort of attraction to certain models. Like, I don't, do you see any, my personal favorite is action mapping, but i in my understanding, that seems to be more catered towards like the corporate world. Do you
Mm-hmm.
see any like weird crossovers? Like, would you ever see action mapping in your territory?
No, not really. No, I don't think so. I mean, it's action mapping is awesome, but I mean, it really is for like the asynchronous modules of the freelance corporate world and like using branching scenarios and stuff like that. Trying to get a faculty member to create like a long branching scenario that they could run
Mm,
through in class. Good luck.
right.
We have
Makes
too many
sense.
things.
Yeah.
There's too many things going on,
Yeah.
and that this is going to be a it's like you're designing a course not just for one faculty member who's designing it with you, but there's
Hmm.
several sections of that course that are going to run for years, and there's going to be
Mm,
different teachers in it. So like, if you had to go through all of that mapping in order to they would look at it, throw it out, and replace it with their new things. What's the point? You
sure.
know.
Makes sense. Interesting. Um, in what way does your line of work, I guess in the higher ed world, how do they approach like the Section 508 or like the American Disabilities Act? What sort of measures do you guys have in place to meet everyone's needs, so to speak?
First off, that's a great question.
Thank you.
That's excellent because I think a lot of that like happens in principle, but doesn't actually happen in real
Mm,
life.
hmm.
However, this is what we do to ensure that we're not excluding anybody with a
Hmm.
disability, right? So everyone on our team is QM certified.
Hmm.
So we use the Quality Matters rubric. That's QM, and it's basically like this giant, standard review or specific review standards for making sure you have a fully fleshed out and tight, effective blended course. So we all went through uh, like a like trainings with QM and got
Hmm.
certified in their rubric and as peer reviewers. So we're all peer reviewers for other schools who use QM. We go through their courses and then kind of audit it against the rubric. So these have specific review standards, and there's one SRS number 8 that is dedicated to accessibility. So it basically breaks down universal design learning
Oh,
principles
universal design. Yeah, big fan of
into
that.
like a checklist of items to make sure that the course provides multiple means of engagement, representation, and action. So using that rubric to help guide design decisions is pretty helpful. Plus, we have the Canvas accessibility checker, which is really helpful. And then it runs through QA, and whoever's QAing the course, there are items on the QA checklist that relate to accessibility. And then outside of that, the school has kind of an amazing support center for students with disabilities and accommodations. And those can always be made.
Awesome.
So we try to cover all that ground. But I mean, there's always exceptions, and
right.
you always have to adjust and accommodate.
You mentioned universal design. One of the, I guess, theories behind it is that there is no one size fits all in terms of instructional design. Just in your personal feeling, how does that jive with you? That sort of thinking.
I agree with it
Yeah,
100%.
yeah,
Everything's nuanced. Like the
right.
second you say like this plus this equals this all the time,
Hmm.
you run into like, you're cutting your nose off to spite your face. You're putting up boundaries you don't need to have.
I feel like,
You're
oh, I'm
creating
sorry.
roadblocks where there aren't any.
I feel like with subject matter experts, that's probably one of the common grounds you might clash with them. There's so many people, I'm surprised, have this idea that no, there is a certain way of teaching, you know? Of course, there are different learning styles and what have you, but in your experience, your encounters with SMEs, do you have any sort of disagreements in terms of, I guess, let's say universal design?
Never with the SMEs, because most of my SMEs are faculty.
Mm, so they get,
Uh, and they don't really, they're all experts in their field, so they don't really know much about pedagogy in general, but they've been
mm,
teaching for a long time, so they've kind of been this sage on the stage for a long time,
mm,
and you have to kind of like slowly guide them, or not guide, but like slowly influence them and train them to be the guide on the side.
mm,
And if anything, if we clash over any kind of pedagogical decision,
mhm,
it's usually quickly mitigated.
mm.
There's not a huge gap between me and Ismi on like, how do I say this? On like our kind of mutually exclusive areas of expertise,
Mm,
right? They know that I know what I'm talking about because I am in this unit and I'm here to help them with these things. If they weren't with me, if they knew those things, then they wouldn't have to run this through an instructional design process. They could do it themselves. And I know that I am not an expert in their field, right? And I would never make that mistake, right? So you have to kind of walk a line and be very careful not to argue about
mm,
content, but make recommendations for delivery in a sensitive fashion. Use, like the SMART framework in order to do it. So,
mhm,
it has to be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. And you make those recommendations where they need to be, not
mhm,
just because you feel like this could be souped up. Is it sufficient? Yes, but is it necessary? No, then don't do it.
mhm. How important is, you mentioned content. So if the instructors are the SMEs, how important is it to understand the content? Because that's actually one of the intimidating factors that I carry is what if I'm working with a SME and a professor who's trying to make a course on like electrical engineering, something I have no idea about. Like how, in your experience, how have you dealt with those kinds of situations?
Um,
You just sort of have a kickoff meeting and hash it out with sort of the SMEs and the stakeholders at once, or do you have to go home and do your own homework?
well, this is one of the things I kind of like love about the job, right? So I'm constantly interviewing professors about like
Mm,
the content and delivery of their courses.
mm,
And I often have to take some deeper dives into the
right.
content, not to learn it, but to identify what kind of learning it is so I can recommend designs for it. And that's one of the great things about instructional design. Like, you don't have to know much about the subject to create an amazing learning experience around it. You just have to identify what kind of learning is being taught and then make recommendations around it. Is it procedural? Is it declarative learning? Is it metacognitive? And then what strategies can you apply to that? But as you design those experiences, you end up learning a ton because you talk about the content all the time, right? And that's something I really love about it. I really love not knowing something about it because you get to approach it from the view of the student and the novice, and you have to cull out of that your main stakeholder, your faculty member, a better explanation, which makes them a better teacher, and it makes your design of the lesson or that part of the content or explanation in the slide even that much better. But
you make a good point. Yeah.
I'm sorry. The biggest challenge, though, with faculty members and SMEs, and this is going to sound super petty, all right, is getting them to give you stuff on time.
Oh, yeah.
They're always late. They always save everything to the last minute. They ignore the advanced organizers you give them. They're afraid of shared docs, so they send you Word versions of material via email.
Yeah.
And it gets super annoying. But I mean, it's kind of pleasantly ironic too, because like their late policies and like their format requirements for assignments are like super strict. So they're never doing what they expect from their students in the design process. So it's not a big deal, but sometimes you have to nudge them or remind them, or maybe CC their boss on like a third ask for something. But it's not something I lose sleep over. And diving into content is part of the fun. It is a challenge, but you also have to like be careful not to try to become an expert in it, because then you kind of suffer from that curse of knowledge. Yeah, and you forget what it's like not to know what you now know, and then you can't empathize with the learner.
You make very good points about working with SMEs, and I want to spend just a little bit more time on the SMEs because they are a big part of how instructional designers essentially operate. I didn't even think about the time issue. That makes a lot of sense. Uh, the one particular sort of issue I wanted to ask about is the curse of knowledge thing. And you made a good point, going into something pretty much not knowing. Is there, in your experience, and you probably already touched upon this, how much of an issue is that where you're talking with experts? Do you ever find yourself sometimes thinking that they're not glossing over the important points? They're only going over their expert points? How much of a problem is that curse of knowledge?
It could be. It really depends on the SME, right? It depends it depends on the faculty member. Getting the answer to that question is only as good as like your interview questions. So you just have to kind of just continue to drill down. Right. Just drill down. That's like a really good. The drill down technique is really good to like getting at like, okay, so what is essential? Like, what can absolutely not be forgotten in order for us to learn this? And then you can separate the need to know from the nice to know and go with the need to know to manage extraneous cognitive load. And that can be a lot more helpful. But generally, when you flesh out a syllabus with a faculty member, and if it's a new syllabus, it goes to the Academic Excellence Committee, and they review it in terms of content, but not pedagogy. So like, my wheelhouse isn't exactly content. It's how to deliver this content in a way where people who know nothing about it can understand it quickly and then use that to solve problems in the world.
Awesome.
Hope that answers your question.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think you already answered it, but the elaboration was, icing on the cake. That's awesome. Before I forget, I want to talk about the needs analysis. What is that like in your line of work? Is it like do you focus on performance issues of the students? If so, like what examples of performance issues do you focus on? Like basically, what's the needs analysis like in your line of work?
It's really like, again with Addie, right? Like I was saying about Addie is like, okay, like we're gonna do the analysis portion now, and it's never really like that. The needs analysis stuff is is really kind of like woven in
Mm,
to like your syllabus and design meetings,
mm, mm.
right? I put this in a way that
So it
doesn't
comes
sound
up during like the
jargony.
kickoff meetings, I
Yeah,
would imagine.
you start with the kickoff meetings, and geez, yeah, and then you go from there.
Mm.
So yeah,
It's
I mean, that's
probably,
honestly,
yeah.
that's basically what it is. Like when you do a needs analysis, you start, if it's a course from scratch, you have to start with your objectives and course goals, right? And then you kind of like start asking questions about like how many students are in the class, right?
Mm,
Usually, okay. So let's plan around that. Like what works better for small classes or big classes. That's part of the needs analysis. Meeting them where they are is a big thing,
mm,
right? So uh like you have to meet the stakeholders or the
mm,
SMEs, like where they are in terms of like technology.
mm,
So that's part of the needs analysis too. Like
mm,
how much are you going to be training uh, a faculty member on something? Do they
mm,
need to do that? Are the students going to need to learn this tool?
mm,
But a lot of it has to do with like, okay, how do we get from A to Z from
mm,
like, you know, the goals to the resources, to the activities, to the assessments, and are those assessments meeting the needs of the institution, right? So like uh, how do you say, like kind of tongue tied here on this.
a lot of
Uh,
terminology.
yeah, it's just I'm just trying to make it as simple as possible because now we're getting in like jargon area.
Right.
As we talk about needs analysis, there's all sorts of like areas that you can take a look at. So like technology is one,
Mm-hmm,
pedagogical needs is another,
mm-hmm,
student needs, accessibility, right, is another
mm-hmm,
thing. Tech training. Uh, uh, how are we going to get resources? Where are
mm-hmm,
those? How are we going to meet course, not just course goals, but program wide goals? Right. So you might have like a specific program like enterprise risk management or something,
mm-hmm,
right? Might have a list of program goals for their master's program. And then you have a list of course goals within your like, enterprise risk management course, I don't know, 237 or something like that,
mm-hmm,
right? That don't align with any of the program goals. So that's a need that needs to be met, right? You need to
mm-hmm,
add something that aligns with the institution's higher goals for the program.
mm-hmm.
So there's like a lot of that stuff in there, but that it doesn't all come at once. Like you kind of, it unfolds as you start working through like the design meetings
I see.
and working out the syllabus and stuff like that.
I see. So for a particular, like for a particular class, how often would you say you have your design meetings until the project, I guess, reaches gold or it's, ready to be uploaded to the LMS? Like how many meetings, let's say per month or what have
It
you?
depends. I do them weekly.
Okay.
So I try to have a weekly meeting depending on the project, right? But
Hmm.
always like meeting for a week. It's not just because we have to create a certain amount of deliverables. It's that I also want to keep them on track because I mean, this isn't their only job.
Do you have those meetings remote as well, or is it
Yeah, they're always
okay?
remote. I've met a
Okay.
couple in person when we were working there, but that was because we shared an office space.
Okay.
Yeah. But if you want, I could kind of walk you through the
Uh,
timeline, the
yeah, I
project
would love
timeline.
that actually. That would be
Okay.
perfect. Yeah, go ahead.
So we have a kind of a general timeline, and we have like very rigid deadlines for QA and course launch because those can't change.
Mm,
What's in between the kickoff and the QA is pretty flexible. So like we define needs and set expectations with a kickoff call. This is also kind of a time to like really start seeding the relationship between you and the faculty, finding things in common, feeling out each other's language,
mm,
seeing how they like to work, what kind of tools they prefer to work in. That's another part of the needs analysis. It's kind of an ongoing thing in higher ed. And then we have weekly design meetings and we kind of set up a schedule like, okay. And a lot of them always want end of the day Friday, right? So, but not
mm,
all of
mm,
them can have them. And that's where we start to kind of flesh out the learning objectives, syllabus topics, course flow, right? Kind
mm.
of a general framework for how the course is going to look. And a lot of that's going to change, but as long as we have something in place, this is where we can work backwards and start mapping. And we go from very broad to very specific, and then we adjust and it's very, we do elaboration thinking on it. About halfway through, I start prototyping in Canvas, and then we work out both the LMS and the course design document, right? So I have this kind of Canvas sandbox. I've created a prototype of the course that we've made so far, and I have a course design document, which is basically kind of like a roided out version of a syllabus. It's basically the Word version of what's going to show up in the LMS, and that's where we do most of our editing and collaborating, throwing notes up and track changes and stuff like that. And that eventually turns into the entire course. But at this point, I've made a prototype, and development and design kind of happen simultaneously. So when the course is at like its first draft, we start looking for opportunities to incorporate media, ed tech, maybe some different activities that they're different than we previously agreed on. And once those have been addressed, we work on the session storyboards and the slide decks, and you really start seeing a shape of a course at that point. And then we just kind of iterate and kind of like sort the wheat from the chaff and chisel everything down and make sure everything's defined. And then we get QA, and we usually get everything done in time. And while QA is happening, I kind of recommend trainings that they can do through like support services that we have, or I run workshops with them on how to use tools more effectively. They tend to always kind of like opt to just work with me because they're used to me. And I know how to talk to them, and I can kind of give them this kind of white glove service. So basically it goes kickoff, objectives, syllabus mapping, design document, prototype, adjust, iterate, kind of the final touches, QA, and then launch. So it does kind of fit into that kind of design thinking framework that I kind of laid out, but that's generally it.
So you go from, it sounds like from design document to prototyping. Is there any room for storyboarding, or is storyboarding more or less better catered towards the corporate world?
The storyboarding is better catered toward the corporate world. However, your design document is basically your storyboard.
Right. Okay.
And then you start visualizing that in the prototype. The storyboards that we use are for sessions. So we chunk out how a session is going to go. For example, it starts with 5 minutes introduction, and then the next 10 minutes is like, activating prior knowledge. You remember the old Chungdom, like student guide or teacher guides?
Yeah.
Those used like Gagne's 9 events in order to map out lessons. And we've kind of adopted that a little bit to make a very solid storyboard for a 2-hour session for a graduate program, and making sure that it's chunked out. So like no more than 20 minutes of lecture, followed by a breakout, followed by a discussion, followed by a break, followed by retrieval, and then maybe a new layer onto the previous lecture, right? So it becomes quite calculated, and it's been more and more so that since the pandemic, because everyone has had to be more precise in their teaching because they're doing it online.
So that pattern that you just mapped out there, especially like the 20-minute lectures and whatever came after that, I guess that's to reduce the cognitive load, to introduce more interactivity, more, training the mind. Do you think your particular university or organization's pattern, would that apply to pretty much across the board to all universities, or is there, yeah.
It's a good way to do it.
Yeah.
It's just a very good way to maintain engagement. The thing is like, engagement doesn't equal good learning. It just, spurs on motivation and keeps attention. So without engagement, you can't learn because you're not attending, right? If you're not, and you want to mitigate any kind of split attention or drifting off or anything like that by changing stimuli every couple of beats. It's kind of like how like montages work, or like, like I guess Sergei Eisenstein's model of montage for like early film was like A plus B equals C, and then C equals a new A plus B. And it continues like to drive the attention forward. Doesn't mean you're learning anything, but you're not paying attention to anything else. And that's really important.
Right.
Also, like, there's, you have limited working memory.
Mm.
cognitive Sweller's research. So
Right,
you have to
swellers,
chunk
cognitive load.
things out
Yeah.
and switch types of engagement, right? So
Mm.
as you go from passive to active, and then you make a connection using metacognition in order to seal
Mm.
those things. So there's also things that you can do, but I mean, those activities are also determined by what dimension or what knowledge dimension
Mm.
the lesson is being taught towards. So is this like factual or conceptual knowledge, like
Mm.
knowing that and knowing what and why, or is it procedural knowledge, knowing how, or is it
Mm.
metacognitive, like
Mm.
knowing why you did what you did and what to do in the future, and all those things, and like all that reflection. So there are
Mm.
different activities to effectively teach specific knowledge dimensions.
Mm.
And that's kind of the wild, I think that's the thing that kind of blows uh, faculty's minds a little bit, because they're like, oh yeah, I never thought about that,
Mm.
because they don't, they're not dipping into like, cognitive science theory.
Right.
So I think when you map those out in kind of an advanced organizer or a template, it makes that like underlying theory much more easy to understand and process.
Um, you mentioned a very important person and a very important term, John Sweller,
Yeah.
and I never heard of this metacognition term in relation to him. Is that the same as his idea of schemas? Is that pretty much the
No.
same thing? No, it's very different.
No. Yeah,
So could you elaborate?
metacognition.
Yeah.
Metacognition is thinking about thinking,
Mm.
and so you bring up schemas. Can I just like run through,
Oh,
because I
please.
can't get to one point unless I talk about another, because I mean
Oh,
like
please.
this
Yeah.
is, we're getting in the weeds in learning theory right now.
Okay.
And
Okay.
like anybody who I guess would be watching this, if they
Mm.
already like know learning theory, don't need
Mm.
to know these definitions.
Well, let me just say this is for
Yeah.
my own selfish purpose then, because
Okay.
yeah, I just got into learning about cognitive load, and I think this is a very important aspect.
Mhm.
But in terms of how you reduce that or reducing overload, and this whole idea of how learning works, how essentially how thinking works, I think this idea of schemas probably, like you said, it's really in the weeds. But man, if it isn't fascinating just to know,
Mhm.
but I think it's also very important to have that sort of uh, in your toolbox, that understanding. But yeah, just in let's say, what do you like about John Sweller's what he touched upon, what his teachings were?
Uh, yeah, Sweller's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it wasn't for Sweller, we wouldn't have Maren Marino's multimedia learning principles,
Mm.
because Sweller kind of identifies cognitive load, and you need to increase the germane load, what is
Right.
important to our learning, reduce the extraneous load, things that are
Mm.
distracting and not relevant, and then manage the intrinsic load,
Mm.
how difficult it is in and of itself
Mm.
from the view of the learner, right?
Okay.
Um,
So in
I
in
guess I
those
guess I
three.
guess I guess I'll go.
Mm.
Now you have me thinking about schema right now. But as far as like cognitive load goes and reducing cognitive load in a multimedia sense,
Mhm.
I would direct anybody to Richard Mayer and Roxana Murillo's
Mm.
research on multimedia learning principles. And there's 12 of them, and they're kind of parted out to
Mm.
deal, excuse me, with each one of those areas of cognitive load, the extraneous, germane, and intrinsic, and using like signaling and
Mhm.
coherence and stuff like that
Mm.
boosts or reduces extraneous load, like
Mm.
using like modality and pre-training, boosts germane load, and then like using like image principle and
Mm.
personalization that manages intrinsic load. So he's kind of like really set up some tools for you to like, when you're designing things, you don't have to
Mm.
worry about cognitive load anymore, because they're already taken care of.
Right on. Righteous.
Yeah.
Let me just look at my list of questions here. Um, okay, so Bloom's taxonomy. The first time I heard about that was from an email from you. Um, so that leads me to one of the previous questions I had was learning objectives. Like, is there an example example you can give for me, like for any particular class? Like what sort of standard, under what conditions would a typical learning objective be for a higher ed classroom project?
Well, I can't think of one right off the top of my head, but I can tell you the construction
Hmm.
of a learning objective. It's a measurable verb,
Mm,
the thing to be learned, the
mm,
degree to which it is learned, and the context.
mm,
So it goes verb, like identify, right? Would be a measurable verb. You can measure whether or not somebody can identify something from a list, right?
mm,
Identify the three types of cognitive load. Okay.
mm, mm,
That's the noun, the thing to be learned, with a, 95% accuracy. That's the
mm.
degree to which they know it,
Mm.
and the context, while being shot at from a car. Okay. Or like, in stressful conditions, or in the context of when looking at a syllabus,
Mm,
right? Or when looking at a slide deck,
mm.
right? So if you have those things all within your objective, you have a measurable, observable objective. Um,
Awesome.
and I think that comes from Major, Mager, Major. I think that's part of his formula for designing a learning objective. But Bloom,
Mhm.
just like Major himself, and the whole idea of learning objectives, isn't research based.
Mm,
So we have to kind of take its efficacy at face value.
I
Um,
see.
but it's an amazing tool for writing specific, measurable, and contextualized objectives. And it also really helps you in thinking what kind of knowledge is being taught. Like I was
Mm,
saying before, like, is it factual? Is it procedural? Is it conceptual? Um, and yeah, just, helps you design interview questions. Like, okay,
mm.
so you want them to learn this. What does that look like? Because a lot of them will say understand. A lot of faculty would be like,
Right,
well,
you
my
can't measure
objective
that.
is
Yeah.
they want to understand how to learn to, make rice.
Mm,
It's like, okay, well, what does that understanding look like?
mm, mm,
So if you were to look at me do something and judge whether or not I can do it, what would I be doing?
mm,
I wouldn't be standing there understanding,
mm.
so like, you kind of walk them through it
That's a
and
good
just keep
point. Yeah.
asking them. Yeah. Keep asking them, what does it look like? What does it look like?
Walking walking your SMEs through, that's a very important thing. I think that can be easily overlooked by, entry level instructional designers. Yeah, you don't want to say like don't use the word understand, but you sort of want to play into what they think that word means. That's a very good point.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's always important to never say don't.
right, right.
Yeah. It's just immediately the walls go straight up. Hmm.
Okay.
Like, I have a PhD. Don't tell me what to do.
Right, you don't want to step on
Yeah.
those toes. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a minefield. Um, okay, let's jump into the interactivity side of things. Um, how do you promote interactivity in like a Canvas a project? Like, what's your go-to strategy?
Um, Man, I mean, I think having interactivity for its own sake is kind of a mistake.
Mm,
Kind of like, well, let's take like freelance, like corporate style, articulate 360 learning stuff.
mm,
Like the click to reveal more info button is a form of interactivity, right?
right,
But I think that's like a bad UX design.
I agree. Yeah.
So like if the interactivity serves the skill being trained, then it's necessary and you should add it, right?
Yeah.
Like, sorting these things together, right?
Or
Drag
like
and drops are good.
scenario
But
based. Yeah.
exactly, right? So like if we need to substitute interactivity for the lack of engagement
Mm,
in a training or in a course, we may need to go back over how we're presenting the material to hold the learner's interest long enough to, you know, get to an
mm,
action item. Because like,
I,
like I was saying again, engagement and interactivity alone doesn't make people learn.
right.
Yeah. So as far as interactivity goes, I think of it more as interaction than
Mm,
interactivity
mm,
in the higher ed sense. And that is, are they interacting with the material? And are they interacting with each other about the interactions they've had with the material?
mm,
So you kind of take like a constructivist view a little bit of it, and people come in, like you kind of like give people experiences, and then they
mm,
come to collaborate with their, individualized experiences that they've had. You've given them all the same kind of task to do to prep for this, and then they bring, how that has been, I guess, assimilated into their existing schemas, and then they collaborate with each other to create a more spherical understanding than a linear one.
Wow, well put. Um, were there any takeaways from uh, working at Cheongdam? Did any skills transfer over well into like this world of pedagogy coming from Androgy? Like, what worked for you? What did you take from Cheongdam?
Oh man, a ton. I mean, like Cheongdam. Okay, let me get this. Let me make this perfectly clear. Okay,
Here we go.
Cheongdam 2.0 was
Mm,
amazing.
mm,
Cheongdam 3.0, the tablet, was
mm.
garbage
Okay.
because it threw out all the best parts
Uh,
of 2.0 and then
mm,
just added a bunch of extraneous cognitive load.
mm.
The
Oh,
tablets, the lack of knowledge building
oh.
underneath the activities, right? And then they would just call it blended learning, which it's not, right?
Mm,
So okay. That being said, I think the skills that I learned at CDI the first couple of years I worked there, when
mm,
they had their 2.0 learning, were incredible because they're all
mm,
study skills and they're all
mm, yeah,
informed by evidence-based practice. They're all
right.
made by instructional designers.
Yeah.
And the processes that they are all processes that help you organize concepts and analyze relationships and
Mm,
come to conclusions and being creative, right? That
mm,
was the whole point. Like build knowledge, practice, be creative,
mm,
right? And that was and present that knowledge in a creative way. So despite age and background,
mm.
in order to learn efficiently, brains need priming and activation. They need to
Absolutely.
know the goals and objectives. They need chunking and scaffolding. They
Mm,
need to engage with worked examples. They need visualization of abstract concepts. They need deliberate practice and space retrieval.
mm,
They need to generate their own metaphors and make multi-contextual associations between things. And they need
mm,
to go from questions to answer to problems to solve. And
mm,
they need that layer of reflection and metacognition to look back on how they accomplished all this, to tie a tight line in narrative form,
mm,
in their own personal narrative, to really encode that, store that, and be able to retrieve it. All of that enhances encoding, storage, and retrieval.
mm,
So, like those original CDI frameworks and skills were examples of all of those things.
mm.
From, what was it? What were they called? From par to Alba Plus, the levels of what they
Oh, yeah.
were,
Oh,
right? That was a brilliant
yeah.
way to scaffold.
Mhm,
And the thing was, is they never put kids in, after 2.0 was kind of like tossed out. They never
mm,
put kids in their actual skill level. And the whole
right.
point of that kind of scaffolding is to get into what I guess Lev Vygotsky calls
Mm,
the zone of proximal development, a desirable difficulty.
mm,
So when you're in that desirable difficulty, you don't even need engagement because they're already they're already stoked on what they're doing. It gamifies it for them,
mm,
right? It's not so hard that they give up and like have a learned helplessness. And it's not so easy that they're like, this isn't worth my time,
mm,
right? So it's rewarding and challenging at the same time. And all of that stuff at CDI has been kind of etched in my behavior when it comes to like just like lesson planning or looking at
mm,
educational material. And that's
mm,
really helped me with my practice as an ID, just having done that for so many years. And now, I doing the program that I did, like putting, explicit knowledge to
mm,
the tacit knowledge that I was training in, just made it just like clouds just parted, you
mm.
know, everything was like very clear. And I was like, yes. So yes, CDI was great. I'm not sure if they fixed that 3.0 problem that they have. Maybe they have. I don't know. I left before that happened.
I uh I can't disagree with your point of view, and I think that's what it depends on, right? It depends on how one experiences that. Personally, for me, I got a huge sense of the blended learning, but specifically because it was, it was on the onus of the facilitator, right? So
Mm-hmm.
as a facilitator, I made the blending learning happen as best as I could. I just loved the tools that I had to force that out of me,
Yeah.
just explain it to the students in your own way and see how they run along with it with their little, fandangled tablets. And to me,
God.
that was like, what
Yeah.
was the term you used, when you enjoy the challenge? Um,
Desirable difficulty?
yeah, that was the desirable difficulty that I came across was how do I make this blended learning? How do I make this into a blended learning environment?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that's what I took away from Cheongnan, and I couldn't disagree with your point of view as well. Actually, I don't know. I can't say anything about the 2.0, but I've heard a lot of good things about the 2.0. But yeah, it
It
makes
was
a lot of sense.
amazing.
Yeah.
It was amazing. I was devastated when I came
Mm.
back and they were just like, "Here's your tablet," and I was like, "What is this? Where's all the skills building? I get the tablet and that's great, but where's the thing that was working? Why did you want to
Mm.
reinvent the wheel?" It just broke my heart and it made me very bitter
Yeah.
because I had to almost break the rules to teach well.
Mm. Mm.
And I would get in trouble sometimes for like giving them paper to write notes on. I would get talked
Oh yeah.
I would get a talking to, but all the research shows that taking notes on paper is much more conducive to learning than taking notes typing or on a tablet
Oh
because
yeah.
with typing or on a tablet you're transcribing what you're hearing.
Mm.
When you're taking notes in that Chungdom style short form, you're generating a new code
Mm.
for what is being heard. So that act of taking notes is actively understanding the material. If you're doing it on a tablet or a laptop, you're just transcribing what you hear.
Mm.
And I would explain that to my managers, and they'd be like, "Just no paper," and I just be like,
You know
you
what?
know,
I do remember those uh those meetings as well, but
yeah.
luckily for me, what I was doing worked. So as long as as long as it worked, they let me, I give
Hmm.
credit to them that they let me do what I wanted to do. Um, but yeah, I couldn't agree with you more as far as the note taking is concerned. Like, who in their mind thought it was a good idea to keep that function in
Hmm.
the tab? I
Yeah.
understand if you start with it, but hey, at some point you got to realize, well, maybe there's no database, maybe there's no metric that they can collect how many students are typing in notes. Like, I
Hmm.
don't think they have that understanding. Brilliant. uh, Let me see. The the quality assurance aspect in your line of work. How do you evaluate? Like, how do you measure learner evaluation? And finally, like after a course is launched, what kind of time for retrospective do you have?
Hmm.
I guess it's on the teacher's onus to
Well,
collect. Yeah.
you don't. Okay, so quality assurance, like we QA other people's courses that they design before they launch. So it's a
Mm,
fresh set of designer eyes on it. And we
mm,
catch a lot of stuff. Everyone's stuff gets flagged. No one has a perfect course. And that's good because it's
mm.
keeping us in check. It's assuring quality, right?
I see. I see.
Um, but as far as the like learner eval goes, like we
Mm,
don't do one.
right.
You can't really like in corporate you can measure behavior like using Kirkpatrick if you start at level 4 and work your way back, right? But in higher ed, like there's no way that you can do that because you're not like, how can I say this? um, Companies rarely operate the way the academy trains potential
Mm,
hires,
mm,
so it's really hard to tell what works in the lab will also translate in the field. And I guess
mm,
that's what like capstone projects are for, but
mm,
those
mm,
aren't
mm.
like, they don't give them enough experience to actually, they don't really actually give them a job, you know.
Mhm.
So student eval is only like, man, it's
How about
hopefully
how
the
about
assess, you know.
I'm sorry, performance like based evaluations? Is that something an instructional designer can look at?
Oh, for the instructors.
In the academic field, like let's say if there's a student who's in like the aeronautics, like sort of engineering field. Is that very different in terms of like a biology student, right? Would you have more difficulty with that?
Well, hopefully the assessments act as the evaluation.
Right,
So
right.
if they're authentic enough
Hmm.
to gauge if the student can transfer that knowledge to a real life context, that should be good enough. Like
Mm,
you can't, not always do it in a real life context. The best you can do is kind of simulate a real life context.
mm,
And if they can do that, a certain number of times correctly, then that's kind of a good enough metric
mm,
to see whether or not they've reached the objectives. Um, but it's really hard to tell in the field because they're not students are not employees in your company,
yeah.
right? They don't continue to work under you and that management. They just go on to the next course,
Hmm.
you know? So you can't really tell if there's a behavior change
Right.
within at the organizational level because there is no organizational level. There are a bunch of students taking classes.
They don't have
Um,
CCTVs like Chengdam. There's
oh
no,
God, no,
yeah,
God, no.
classroom observation.
Yeah. Well, there's observations, but I
Oh yeah.
mean, yeah, the people doing the observations are just making sure that I think professors aren't drunk, honestly.
Fair
No,
enough.
they have a set of metrics. I've been observed at the university level as a teacher, and they
Uh,
just sit in there and go through a checklist and make sure that
mm,
you're not lecturing the entire time,
mm,
that you are cold calling, stuff like that. But they don't do like an observation on like they can't tell like whether the pedagogy that you're using in like an activity is directly contributing to the learning of an objective. They just kind of like observe your behavior, I guess. But that's at the teacher level, and you can't really tell like if students learn anything from the student evals at the end of the course because
mhm,
those just really measure how much they like the instructor, which doesn't really tell you much about how much they learned. It might tell you how
mm,
much they, that like how much they feel like they learned, but
mm.
those two things are pretty much mutually exclusive. So, like it's I feel like I know things that I definitely don't know.
Mm,
Like, okay, I'm gonna share a.
please.
I feel like I'm getting in muddy water, but I'm gonna share a whiteboard here. Can you see that? Can
Okay.
you see the
Yeah.
whiteboard?
Oh yeah.
Okay, cool. So, um, think about what we think we know as a circle. That indicates how much we think we know about a topic, right? Let's call this topic X, right? This
Well,
is how
hold on
much,
one second. I'm not
yeah.
seeing what you're drawing. I just see a whiteboard. Are you drawing anything on there?
Yeah, I'm drawing stuff on a whiteboard. Do you see the
Oh,
whiteboard?
yeah, I see the whiteboard. It's nothing's producing though. There's no.
Oh, it's because I paused sharing on accident.
Ah, okay.
There we go. Right. I'm going to stop share and then I'm going, sorry. I
It's all
hit a
right.
button on accident. Where's the whiteboard? Okay. Do you see it now?
Yeah. Okay. There we go. Cool.
Okay. So we'll call this topic X, right? And
Hmm.
this is how much we think we know, or I think I know about topic X, right?
Hmm.
This circle inside represents how much I probably actually know.
Mm,
Okay. This circle inside this circle represents how much I can communicate of this circle, right?
mm,
And this circle right here is how much people understand of what I communicate.
mm.
And the only one that's really important is this circle
Right. Absolutely.
because that represents explicit knowledge.
Hmm.
Explicit. This represents like basically like a facsimile of
Mm,
tacit knowledge.
mm.
This is your tacit knowledge, and this is your ego.
Wow.
So like the whole goal behind learning objectives is to take this circle and expand it as much as we possibly can. Try to make it at least as big as the communication circle. That's
Mm,
the way I kind of look at it. And that's how I would say that we can really measure if learning took place.
That made
But
a
that's
lot
just
of
about
sense. I like that.
that's not just about like communication though, but it's
Yeah.
also about like what you can do, like what you
Mm,
think you can do, what you can
mm,
actually do, what makes a difference, and what is valuable to people.
mm.
And you gotta expand the value portion, right? So, yeah.
Wow.
Sorry, that it took me a while to think through that, but yeah, I hope hopefully that answered your question.
No, that was well worth it. That diagram alone just painted a very detailed image in my mind of how knowledge, explaining your knowledge is can work sometimes. Wow, that was I needed that. I needed to see that. Thanks, man. That's cool.
Yeah, right. Sorry, I feel like I'm floundering a little bit, but
Ah,
yeah.
I like pick brain about this stuff.
I love talking about it. This is like my favorite thing. I don't even have any hobbies anymore. Like
Yeah,
I don't even play music anymore. Like
don't give that up.
I have just been mainlining this stuff. Like my girlfriend
Mm.
is constantly making fun of me. Like I get a package from Amazon in the mail. She's like, "Oh, is it another book about
Yeah.
learning, nerd?" Yeah, like yes, it is. As a matter of fact.
Dude, even
Yeah.
from the get-go, you just ran like full sprint with this. Once you found out what instructional design was, I'd never seen anyone just react so quickly to an idea and adopt it. I'll tell you, I've told a few friends, and they're like, "Yeah, that sounds cool. I might look into that." And, whatever. I've mentioned, someone asked to me like, "What are you studying?" Instructional design, and I literally they said that sounds boring. I was like, I guess it does sound boring, but you have no idea, It's
I
just
think it's infinitely
great.
fascinating, and
But
it the
the
rabbit
truth
hole just goes
is,
deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper.
absolutely, the truth is it has a lot to offer. I mean, I love teaching. I love what teaching has given me. I like being called a teacher. There's a certain empowerment I get from that, but more than that is just the being the like conductor behind the learning process. Even that sounds boring, but I mean there is a certain intuition that comes to play. There is a lot of interactivity, a lot of understanding psychology. Oh my God, this does sound boring, but I mean
No, no,
just
all of this is like you have my undivided attention. Yeah.
it. If there's anyone with any kind of educational background who feels like they're kind of stuck and they want to do something else, but they want to use their background, there's nothing better than instructional design.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah, especially if you don't want to deal with student management.
there we go. There we go. That's the big thing. That's the big thing.
If you're more concerned with learning than babysitting,
I'll tell you, I'm
instructional
glad
design might be for you. Yeah.
there's for anyone who's been through the gamut, all the teachers, hats off to you because students they will give you a crucible but to walk away from that, it's a very proud, very compelling sort of skill set. And to apply it to instructional design, come on, it's like, wow, you really made it to that point,
Yeah.
you know?
Those 3 hour classes back to back at
Whew.
Cheongdam are brutal,
Yeah,
man.
man,
Brutal.
we did it
You
though.
know, not to complain about policy, but like even though like you can't really call in sick,
Yeah,
it becomes very, very like you learn very quickly how to teach.
yeah,
And by
that's
teach, I
true.
mean you know how to handle a bunch of restless kids that
Right,
don't care about you.
right.
So like, yeah, it can be, it was amazing couple of years just like learning how to do that. And those skills transfer to dealing with adults too.
Oh yeah, yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah.
Um, if someone asked you, like, prior to working at Columbia, did you have any experience teaching adults? What would you say? Like, especially, how would you connect that to Cheongdam? Because we're talking about middle school kids, but is there any transfer, any connection there?
Between how adults learn and how children learn.
Well, let's take middle school students. Let's take Korean middle school students.
Mhm.
Is there any parallel, like, with their level of dedication, with their level of activity to what
Mhm.
you've experienced with adults? Or maybe
Mm.
differences. What are some big differences you can take away with?
So like Korean middle school students in general
Mm.
compared to all adults,
Let's say American adults
American adults. I
or
think
college
that
students.
I'll say this, and
Mm,
I say it much to my chagrin. I'm not being cheeky. I
mm,
honestly think so. I think that a middle school Korean student is more literate than a 25-year-old American
mm.
adult with a bachelor's degree.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm talking about.
Unfortunately, and mostly it's because those students had the Haiwan system. They
Mm,
learned how to learn, and they learned how to read for understanding.
mm,
And they also have a cultural element
mm,
that we shouldn't completely reject, and they shouldn't completely embrace,
mm.
but that there is an answer for this, and
Yeah,
there's one
yeah,
answer. It's the correct answer. You remember it, and you use it when you need to.
yeah, yeah.
American education has kind of shifted toward like this very hyper Socratic, not just what do you think it means as a
Mm.
form of discovery, but what do you think it means as a form of like a truth.
Right,
So
right, right.
whatever you think and feel about a thing in your mind as an adult American tends for you to be the truth. And I think that's bullshit,
Yeah,
right?
I agree with you.
And
I
yeah,
agree.
and that screws up your literacy, right? There are rules and things that can be bent, and of course are not absolute. And also, some of those rules, like in grammar, have a history in subjugation and oppression. But you can, alter those and update uh, that system to get those
Mm,
things, those underlying things out of there, instead of just saying like, oh, it's whatever you want it to mean, because
mm,
your experience is the overriding quality and knowledge always. I don't believe that, and I
mm,
don't think the research shows that either.
mm,
And I think the evidence of that is that adult Americans between the ages of 18 and 30
yeah,
are not as literate as they were 100 years ago.
yeah, yeah.
And I think that's why. Um, but in terms of like how they learn,
Hmm.
uh, adults are different, but not completely. Like the idea of andragogy, like Malcolm Knowles' andragogy of adult learning
Hmm.
principles, isn't like adults learn via andragogy and students learn, or children learn via pedagogy.
Mm,
It's like basically andragogy is not separate from pedagogy; it's in
mm.
addition to.
I see.
So even as you're adult, that those pedagogical practices that are kind of informed by cognitive psychology and learning sciences and neurosciences still apply to the adult mind. It's just
Hmm.
really what's different is the motivations, is
Good
motivation
point.
in learning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Adults, I guess, like one thing that stands out with Malcolm Knowles is adults are more intrinsically motivated. Is that right? Like they're more,
Mm-hmm.
it's more self-esteem, aware of self-esteem,
Mm-hmm.
challenges. They like challenges as well.
Yeah.
Uh, but there were some magical moments with, especially working with not just middle school students, but by God, like elementary school students, Korean students who you could see that behavior, very intrinsically motivated,
Mm-hmm.
very um, motivated by challenges and really didn't need so much as just a bit of facilitation.
Mm-hmm.
But your answer really was what I wanted.
Well, I'm
This
glad that
is,
I could confirm your bias, man.
oh man,
I'm happy.
I'll
I'm
tell
happy
you,
I could oblige. Yeah.
I have a job interview in a few days, and I feel that one of the questions they're going to ask me is, what experience do you have with teaching adults? And I really wanted to emphasize that there is a comparison or at least some kind of parallel to what I've experienced working with Korean students. I
Mm-hmm.
really believe that. And I think your answer really highlighted some of the things that I want to express to the interviewing managers. So I'm gonna think about that a lot. So I really appreciate that answer. I think if you have time, I just want to spend the rest of the time just catching up. I think we pretty much covered all the things that I really wanted to hear from you about in terms of instructional design. Of course, I want to talk about that too, if that's involved in the catching up thing. But did
Yeah,
you uh,
absolutely.
did you watch the latest UFC?
Yeah, he
Yeah.
ragdolled Gaethje, man.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
He gave him a good beating.
Yeah. I would say that's definitely. Hall of Famer right there.
Oh, he's done
Very,
now.
yeah, he's done.
Yeah, he's done. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah. What I mean, some of those jujitsu transitions were unseen by him.
I,
By him.
I feel like they were more Sambo transitions.
Well, yeah, I'll say, yeah,
There were more.
Sambo. Yeah,
He had like less finesse and more power
right.
through those things because
I
he's so
forget that,
strong. You know.
I forget that. Yeah,
Yeah.
he has a Sambo background. Sambo,
Mhm.
for anyone who doesn't know, is basically Russian jiu-jitsu, right? Russian judo and jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, it's Russian MMA. It was
Yeah.
designed by the KGB for their
Wow.
agents during the Cold War. It's just they just tried to find, they developed a system, whatever works. And
Yeah.
that's what Sambo really means, whatever fucking works.
Mm,
Like, like that's it. Headbutts, bites.
yeah.
It's like Krav Maga if it worked,
Right.
you
Right.
know? Yeah.
Wow.
Hmm.
Yes, watching some of those like if you ever like watch like combat sambo, it's basically MMA with padding, but it's
Yeah.
it rivals some of the best premier MMA organizations just in the sambo
Fedor.
community. Yeah, Fedor Emelianenko. Yeah.
Fedor Emelianenko and his
Yeah.
brother, who
Yeah.
always looks like he just got
Alexander.
out of bed. And they just lunk on people are all sambo fighters. Oleg Toktarov was a sambo champion. Khabib's a sambo
Mm,
champion. There's tons of the sambo guys. I think it's a combination of like sambo, like the
mm,
techniques work,
absolutely. Yeah.
but also like being Russian.
Mm. Oh yeah.
I think that has a big thing to do with it. And growing up post Cold War, so
Right.
post Soviet Russia, you're growing up. It's not you're just going to become tough.
And to add a layer to that, was he like from Kyrgyzstan?
Yeah.
That's another layer right there, man.
Yeah. Rustling bears and shit when he's like
Oh
10.
yeah.
It's like a Davy. He's like the Russian Davy Crockett. Yeah.
Yeah, that was awesome. Did you I only caught two fights. I didn't the time differences caught me off guard, but luckily I saw the last two. Did you see the Robert Whitaker fight?
No, I didn't. I just saw the Khabib bite.
That was good too. It was a lot of sort of back and forth. I unfortunately I was cooking in the middle of it. I didn't catch too much of it, but that was a good fight too. But yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't see any others. But I haven't talked to Mukhtar in a while, but he definitely sent me a message after the Khabib fight. That was a great fight. Yeah.
Did you watch the Lomachenko fight?
No, I didn't. No,
He
that
lost.
yeah.
He
Oh
lost all his
man.
belts in the unification fight. It was a decision. It
Oh
was a
man.
great boxing match.
Are you
Yeah.
still doing the boxing, by the way?
COVID, man.
Yeah. I
I
mean,
was. I'll tell you what. I was helping train an MMA guy
yeah.
who I was when I first moved here, and I was bartending part time. This dude
Yeah.
named Jerome the Mechanic Mickle,
There you
uh,
go. I like that.
fights
Got it right.
Bellator,
No
and
shit.
yeah, and he found out that I was a wrestler, and he's like, "Will you come train with me? I need someone to grapple with, no one to roll." And he needed to work on his wrestling. So I went there and started working with him, and him and I became like pretty good buddies. And I used gym a little bit, which is
Yeah.
great. But I got my cornerman's license, right?
Oh, wow.
So so he calls me up. He's like, will you be my corner in the next fight in Atlantic City? I was like, hell yeah,
Oh,
absolutely. What do I have to do? So I just filled out this thing, paid $15. They sent me a cornerman's license, which I have.
wow.
Do I have it on me? Hold on. Let's see if I can find it. All right. Let's see if it's in here. I hope it's here because I want to show you.
I want to see.
It's just too funny. There it is. All right. Here we go.
Man. Man, from handstands to corner man, there's only one person that can pull that off. That's awesome, dude.
That's your New Jersey,
New Jersey.
New Jersey Athletic Control Board license.
That's awesome.
So like I
Man.
get there right at Atlantic City, and I show up off the bus, and I run into Rome at the Tropicana, and I say, okay, so where is everybody? Where's all the stuff that where's gear and all that stuff? He's like, it's just you and me. I said, what? He goes, yeah. I was like, you're fighting tonight in Atlantic City, and you have one corner man who's never done this before? He's like, yeah, but you'll be fine. I was like, where are all your friends? He's just like, I don't need any friends. I was like, all right, fine. So like, I was like, where's the gear? Where's the gauze, the ice packs, all that stuff? He's like, oh, you got to go to Dwayne Reed and go pick all that up. I was like, you got to be kidding me, right? So I go there, I get all this stuff. And I'm sitting in the green room, and
Mhm.
there's like, there's a proper, like Bellator fight or whatever. And there's like all these like gnarly, you have blue
Mhm.
corner and red corner, and they're in
Mm.
separate locker rooms, right? And these
They're mad
guys are
dogging you.
just, no, they're super cool,
All right.
but they're like, right here
Yeah.
about to snap, right? Because they get called, they don't know when the fight's going to end, right? And they're just, up there, and I'm doing, mitts with Rome and
Wow.
stuff like that. And I'm talking to a couple of these other guys, like, like, this is like, I'm an old hat at this, just trying to play it off. Anyway, we get out there, and Rome goes all 3 rounds. He loses on decision.
Mm.
And yeah, and I did all the corner man stuff, was like shoving Q-tips up his nose to stop
Yeah.
bleeding, and like, doing his cuts and all that stuff. Like I'm FX fucking Tool.
That's
and
awesome.
and yeah, and then we went and partied in Atlantic City that
Whoa.
night. That was it. So yeah, but to answer your question, no, I haven't kept up the boxing. It's been
Yeah.
too busy. I run a lot.
Yeah.
I run every day. Yeah,
Mm.
I've kind of become a runner.
Yeah, me too. Oddly enough, I wasn't never really a runner, but what else can you do?
Yeah.
I I found a jiu-jitsu gym. It said open. I looked inside. It was clearly like, being demolished. There's nothing here. Um, yeah, I got a little running regimen as well. Um, actually, I don't know if you know this, but I had a terrible knee injury in South Korea. I had to get
I do remember you had surgery.
yeah, yeah, and I'm kind of I've accepted not having to step in on a mat anymore. That's fine with me, man. But I'm luckily it's recovered 100%. I feel like, which is like amazing. You can't really ask for that. Um, but yeah, I get the itch. There's this guy. He runs around here. He'll do like some shadow boxing. It's like, man, I want to go find out. If he's a training partner. But it's
Or you just might
like
be a crazy guy.
it might be a crazy guy, but I don't care, man. The instinct is still there. But
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see guys in Central Park,
oh yeah.
yeah, doing mitt work, and always kind of want to go up to them and be like, "You guys have a card? Or is this a gym that's just now outside?" But I don't ever want to interrupt anybody training or anything like that, so I just keep
Yeah,
running.
I'm sure you remember there was one time, I came to you for help. You were the boxing guy. I did Muay Thai, but I had just a impromptu someone calling me out on like just like for a sparring match or something, and I was nervous as hell. But you were the only
Yeah, I
guy I
remember.
knew. Yeah,
Yeah.
right in front of the city hall station. We
Mm-hmm.
were doing mitt work. There was a police
Mm-hmm.
car out there parked, like scoping us out
Yeah.
to make sure like we weren't trying to kill
Yeah.
each other. But
Uh-huh.
if anything, I don't know if I took any transferable skills, but if anything, there was a mindset that you prepped me for, and I went into that fight going up against a big Ajashi, by the way, huge guy. And he was, I had my hands up the whole time, and he was just, peppering away at my defense. And then it just took one, like Chuck Liddell style overhand right, not even looking at where it was going to end that fight.
Oh,
And I
you
was like,
nailed him? Yeah.
yeah, I nailed him. I nailed him.
Mm-hmm.
He was backing me up, and I just an instant like hands came down, overhand right, haymaker, and just kind of that ended the fight. And I was like, that
Nice.
was Dave put me in that mindset, man. He
That's all you.
he prepped me. But I mean, those are good times, man. What do you miss about Korea? I miss that kind of stuff. I miss just the crazy, just random sparring session in
Uh,
front of the city hall building. Not much.
I don't miss much,
No.
honestly.
Well,
That
I
was
mean, you've
well
stepped up your game. Yeah.
that last year like
Mm.
was hard on me.
Oh, really?
I didn't expect it to be, and it was. It just was. It just ended up being like really hard.
Oh, man.
I was a little bit depressed, and I was trying to like fill that with the boxing stuff, which was
Uh,
helping. Um, but I don't think I didn't want to be there.
I see.
That last year, and I
Yeah.
had some really great experiences the prior
Mm.
years. But I think
Mm.
I just yeah, I don't even I don't know what it
Understandable.
was. If I was gonna miss anything about
Mm.
it, when I had a motorcycle
Oh,
there,
really?
that
Okay.
was that was great. you know, going around there. I love their transit system.
Oh,
Korean buses, the cross country buses are amazing. Um, what else? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I liked it. I like living in a foreign country and trying to speak Korean, and the food is very good. I do
mm.
miss the food sometimes. It's hard to find good Korean food. Yeah,
Man, I had no idea. It seemed I only knew you for like what, a year while
a
you were
year.
in Korea. Yeah, seemed like you were really like an upbeat dude, energetic, like go-getter. Um, yeah, if there was any inclination that you're having a hard time, I didn't see it at all. So, I mean, hats off to you for dealing with it as well as you did. But I got the impression that you were just, I mean, maybe that's why that's who you are. You know, you're the handstand guy. Um,
Just love that. I don't even remember that. You had to remind me of that. I
oh
did a
man,
handstand like my
it's
first day of work and like
yeah,
ripped
first
my
impressions,
pants
man.
right down the center.
Because it
Uh,
made the handstand thing did not make sense until the instructional design thing was introduced, and to see you sort of your eyes open, I was like, ah, he's the handstand guy. I get
mm,
it now. Get it, you know.
makes sense to
So
me.
that's
Well, that's
awesome.
very flattering. I really appreciate it, and thank you for suggesting it to me. It changed my whole life.
Well, I'm glad I did, and I thank you for taking it as far as you have, and you know, I know you're going to take it further. You know, foreseeable future. Which part of New York are you in, by the way?
Manhattan.
Manhattan? Awesome,
Mm-hmm.
awesome, dude.
Yeah.
Well, man, hopefully, you know, international travel will sort of be more, you know, in favor in the not too distant future. I definitely hope to make my way down there. You know, my wife's got some friends down there, and I think you're the only guy I know, to be honest. So
I
definitely
mean,
gonna have to
yeah, I mean, like,
catch you up.
I don't really, uh, really, I mean, just because of COVID, I don't really do much.
Yeah,
But anytime friends come and visit, we do the whole town. So, like, anytime you come out, you're more than welcome.
cool, awesome.
Absolutely. Show you around. We'll have a great time.
Okay, well, I think this is a nice sort of time to wrap up the meeting here. It's been a very eye-opening. I learned a lot from your perspective, and this is definitely going to prep me for what I have coming down the pipeline. So I definitely appreciate it, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, my plan is to sort of share this with others as well. So if that's fine with you, I'd like
Yeah,
to
sure.
sort of put this on the web. By the way, just I'm curious, what do you think about my website? I was going to put it on the website. Have you had a chance to
It's great. It's
mm,
great. Did you design it with mobile in mind?
with what in mind? I'm sorry, mobile.
Mobile,
Oh,
mobile.
mobile. Oh, um, that I have to.
Handphone.
Yeah, I have to give credit to my wife. She's the web designer.
Mhm.
So whatever she helped me with, yeah, it does seem to be quite mobile friendly.
Yeah. Is it
Um,
Squarespace?
no, it's just what was it? WordPress. It's
It's
WordPress.
just it's a
Yeah,
word. Yeah. Okay.
yeah,
It's a WordPress
yeah.
engine. Yeah, it's
Which
great.
oddly enough,
Your
yeah.
examples are fantastic,
Oh, thanks, buddy. Yeah,
especially your articulate examples. They're
yeah.
really really good. No, I was really impressed. I liked your
Well,
blog, and it's very good. So good job.
thanks, man. Yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely I'm gonna put this on the blog. That was my plan. Um, hopefully, you know, we can do this again soon and sort of. I don't know if this is ever going to be like a podcast or anything like that, but you're the only guy I know who I can talk to about this stuff, and I really want to talk about this stuff. I imagine
Anytime,
you,
dude.
yeah,
If you want to do like like a monthly or biweekly, like just hey, let's talk about instructional design.
sure,
I'm always up for it because I love talking about it. I just like it. And plus, like I really really enjoyed this conversation a lot.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
I'm so glad that you reached out to me and because like I don't get to talk about theory that often. I
mm,
just have to make recommendations based on the theory that I know. So stuff like this like really helps me like actively pull that information out and keep it explicit. It also helps me like kind of define like identify gaps where I need to learn a little bit more about this
mm.
because you asked me that question and I was like, I can't answer that immediately. I need to learn more about this, right? So yeah, so that's been great, and I think that kind of soundboarding is priceless. So it's invaluable. So
Absolutely.
anytime you want to do one of these,
Awesome.
you're more than welcome to ask me. I will definitely do it.
Sounds
If you
good.
want to make a little podcast or whatever, we can tackle a topic each month
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
or something like that. And
Exciting.
no
Cool.
aspirations, just for personal development.
Yeah. And I think a lot of, this is relatively, outside of its infancy, this field, I think a lot of people would benefit from to hear, especially considering you're from the higher ed side of things. I think there probably isn't too much of, sort of this kind of impromptu dialogue. I haven't come across any podcasts like this. I've heard instructional design podcasts, but nothing like this. So I think it would definitely benefit the world of instructional design to at least, share your perspective on it. Um, I look forward to again soon, man. You look like you're doing pretty good, man. I like your apartment. It reminds me a lot of your apartment in Korea. Just
You want a little tour?
yeah.
Okay, so this is our tiny little kitchen. Oh, wait,
Oh,
let me go to that. It's just
that
like,
yeah.
sorry, it's right there. It's very small. But
That's
here's our
definitely you.
but
Yeah.
this is our Liechtenstein wall.
Wow.
And then there's the bar and the windows. There's my girlfriend and
Righteous.
her workstation.
Awesome.
And you have seen the apartment. There's a bedroom back there,
Yeah.
and there's a bathroom right there. So
Righteous.
it's an Upper West Side 1 bedroom. So
Ah.
we have a very big we have a very big living room space,
Huh.
and it's great. We have big windows and great light.
Mhm.
But it's pretty small, but
That's awesome.
I love it. Yeah.
Right on.
All the art that's not the Liechtensteins my girlfriend painted, so she painted all these.
That's awesome. That's like
All this stuff.
some
She's a
kind of
painter.
tentacle thing going on there. That's awesome.
Octopus. Yeah.
Octopus. Yeah.
hmm
Righteous.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you're doing well and you're enjoying Texas and you're back home and you're married.
Yeah.
And you're married. And
Yeah.
yeah. Last time I saw you weren't married.
That's true. Not too long ago.
Uh-huh. So yeah. Congratulations
Thanks, buddy.
on the marriage. It's fantastic.
Yeah, she's awesome. She's
Oh,
like I said, she's a web designer professional, and we sort of
awesome.
complement each other on
Dude,
our
if you ever
endeavors.
work in LMSs, knowing HTML, CSS,
Yeah.
and JavaScript
Yeah.
they will give you a crazy advantage,
Absolutely.
a crazy edge.
No doubt about it. Maybe I could
Yeah.
pull her into that world in a not too distant future. But yeah, I'm stoked about this job interview, especially now that I've talked to you. I think I have the right vernacular to present myself with when I go in this meeting. I was so primed from the corporate side of things that I didn't really realize how much of how stark a difference there was between that and the higher ed,
It's
obviously, right?
interesting how
Yeah.
like the programs that you
Mm.
go through to get like your master's degree. Also, congratulations on finishing the master's.
Oh, yeah, buddy.
Uh, they set you up
Mm.
for like corporate style stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. They could set you up for that. Mine was really focused on K through 12, like doing
Mm,
instructional design for K through 12. And
mm,
I wanted to work with adults. I wanted to do
mm,
adult learning. And they had it like there was a lot of K through 12 stuff because we used lots of ed tech tools.
mhm.
Getting used to them, like a huge like selling point of the program was that you're going to learn every Web 2.0 tool there is, and you're going to have a project to put in a portfolio for all of these tools, right? And then and those are all kind of geared toward K through 12. And then they teach you like articulate and stuff like that, and making asynchronous stuff and working with SMEs. But then they give you some LMS
Mhm.
work, which is I always found very bizarre because like and yeah, I did a bunch of stuff in Moodle, but that was also because it was my grad assistantship
Mhm.
at a graduate assistantship, and I just built a ton of courses in Moodle. So that was part of
Mm.
it. It's like part of my capstone was this
Mm.
GA ship. But they never really focused on like, this is how you navigate the politics of higher education. I mean, that would have been a
Mm.
great class.
Yeah.
Or this is how you interview a faculty member.
Mm.
They never kind of gave us that. They just kind of gave us, this is how you do ID work, full stop.
I same experience. Yeah.
Did
And
you?
I didn't have any lessons on LMS, any courses that touch LMS. I had to teach myself that. But yeah,
So interesting.
there was no, there was one class that talked about, the terminology and subject matter experts. But yeah, there was no like sort of practicing. There was no performance-based assessment of those things. It was how to use Adobe Suite, how to use, Storyline, how to use Camtasia, which, those things are important.
Very
But
valuable skills.
man, did I have the wrong idea when I first started
Mm-hmm.
looking into jobs. It was like, that's when I started buying books. I'm a huge fan of this guy, Tim Slade. I don't know if you've heard of him, but
Yeah.
he's really made a name for himself.
You bit
Freelance.
the big blue book.
Yeah. Um, I, that's a very uh, sort of condensed. It's a handbook basically.
Mm-hmm.
And I just got who's it, Kathy Moore's book recently. The was it like action, something about action mapping.
Mm.
Um, there's another thing, but yeah, this is most of it was self-taught, I guess is my point, which was an enjoyable process. But yeah, I'm surprised it's got to come full circle where instructional design, courses really mirror the practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But what kind of what books do you recommend? What are your favorites?
God, I've freaking so many. Well, it just depends on what you want to learn, right?
What's the
I would
yellow one? I think you showed it to me. There's a yellow one.
design for how
Yeah,
people learn
yeah.
by Julie Dirksen.
Okay.
She's great. Design for how she's awesome. And what she goes through really applies to both like freelance and higher ed.
Mm,
And she's just I've seen her at conferences and stuff, and her presentations and stuff are fantastic. They're always
aw-
good. She's cool, but I got more into let's see, it's Jared Stein book called Essentials for Blended Learning. Anything by Jared Cooney Horvath.
mhm,
Anything by John Hattie is fantastic. I
mm,
read all of Vygotsky's stuff.
mm,
Anything by Robert Gagne.
mhm.
But this book is probably the best for theory.
Awesome. All right.
Like that one's probably the best for theory. This is fantastic. This was like written by Marcy Driscoll out of University of Florida State, and
Mhm,
she was a disciple basically of Robert Gagne,
mm,
and she breaks down every single psychology theory that applies to learning in a
mhm,
very, very amazing way. I got books all over the place. This one's really good.
mhm.
This one's by John Hattie, and this is a fantastic book.
Awesome.
There's a book by. This one's pretty good. This is by the Learning Scientists. They run the
Uh-huh.
Learning Scientist podcast.
Oh.
And it's a thin, kind of like manual style book. This is a really interesting book, especially if you want to learn how things like apply to higher ed.
Uh-huh.
And just like kind of these 7 principles for like how we learn in general. And then they kind of walk you through some like history. This one's really cool, but it's more of a deeper read. These are kind of like scientific papers that have been curated. These are fantastic. These are rad. This is kind of a deeper dive on this book, which is all of the studies that are kind of laid out using instructional design principles. So that's one study. They tell you the implications for things. It's all coded in a certain way.
Wow.
and it's a lot of, it's all the case studies,
Okay.
which is great. I would say, yeah, that one's not entirely essential. Yeah, this one, the Jared Stein book.
Mm,
This is a fantastic book for designing higher ed courses.
mhm.
Like that's the first
That's
one
the
you
go-to.
probably should read. This is great.
Right on.
I got a bunch of them. They're all over the place. So
You don't
yeah.
say.
Yeah, so those books, yeah, it just kind of depends on what you're looking for. Is I just kind of like slowly built like a big reference library, you know.
It's a good one at
Um,
that. Yeah.
there's another really great. This is a fantastic book. Where is it? Over here. Come here. Yeah. This is awesome. I just bought this on a whim. This is fantastic. This book.
Mhm.
And this gives you like not just like, it doesn't really give you theory at all. What it does is it gives you activities,
Mm,
like ones that work for specific things. Like it gives you like a whole list of assessments. It also like has baked in workshops that you
mm.
can use to adapt to your lessons.
See.
And it's also not that big of a book. And because like, you know, most of this stuff can be like, if it's written correctly and like using those principles, is to the point. There's no
That's the
bloat.
thing.
There's no padding.
I like the way
Yeah.
instructional designers write their books. It's chunked out, you know.
Yeah.
It's very easy to receive the information that they're trying to share. Yeah.
Also, another one I think is essential is Clark Quinn's book,
Hmm.
Millennials, Goldfish, and Other Learning Myths.
Hmm.
And he walks through like all of the learning myths. So does that book John Hattie does, but
Mm.
the one that Clark Quinn wrote is a much more fun book.
Let's see.
And the way that he's like laid everything out is like very non-academic. So it's very, you can absorb it very, very quick. Anyway, he walks through all of the learning myths and like why we can't be actively disabused of our misconceptions. Like
Mm.
this idea of learning styles is
Hmm.
complete bullshit. There's
Right,
no
right.
evidence to suggest that a person's learning preference leads to, you know, better learning, right? But teachers are the ones that are propping these things up, because in
Yeah,
teacher training programs, they don't teach them how to teach. They teach them student management and student development theory.
yeah, yeah.
So they don't, like, teachers get out with an MAT, a master's in teaching, and they don't actually know how to teach, but they know everything about, you know, student management and childhood development theory,
Right.
but they don't know anything about pedagogy. So they think things like, "Ooh, learning styles. I'll do that. I'll survey my students. What do you prefer to do?" And then I'll have stations, and then the kids don't learn anything. Yeah.
It's so fascinating how, at this time in, human development, we haven't mastered that. It seems like we're turning the corner now with instructional design. I mean, maybe that comes off as a biased, uh, uh, you know, uh, uh, that's my opinion, but it's scary how much these theories are um, still taught and still respected by a lot of teachers, especially. That's fascinating. Like, yeah. Anyway, man, I don't
I could
want to
talk
take
about
too much
I
of
could
your
talk
time.
about this stuff all
Yeah.
night, but I know you want to go. So
I don't want to take too much of your time on this fine Sunday evening. I'm very grateful for, the time that you've decided to share with me. I hope we can do it again in the not too
yeah,
distant future.
this
Like I
was
said.
fantastic. I've always liked talking to you, and now we get to talk about this. So you know, those are two things that I like that I can combine. So I'm really happy about that. Just like let me know whenever. I'm pretty
Absolutely.
flexible. You know, I'm always home. So
Let me know when you're cornering your next fight on Bellator. I'll catch in.
okay. Oh
Seriously,
man.
man. If it happens,
Yeah.
I gotta see it.
It'll
Okay.
never happen again. It was a fun and exhilarating
Yeah.
experience, but like the other corner, there's like six guys there,
Yeah.
and Rome's such an asshole. It's just like, yeah, no, you'll be fine. Yeah.
Awesome. I
Like,
appreciate
okay.
it, man. Thanks again.
All
You have
right,
a good night,
boss.
buddy. All
Yeah,
right.
you take care. Bye.
Take care.